At 54, I had finally stopped apologizing for the life I'd built. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. It took me the better part of a decade. A divorce that left me financially gutted. 2 years of freelance accounting work from a kitchen table that wobbled, unless you wedged a folded magazine under the left leg. And eventually, the cottage, in Prince Edward County that I had bought on my own, with my name alone on the deed, to get to the place where I could sit on my back porch with a cup of tea and feel something I could only describe as settled, not rich, not comfortable in the way people mean when they say comfortable, settled. Like I knew exactly where the edges of my life were and I had chosen all of them deliberately. The cottage wasn't fancy. It was a century home on 2 acres just outside Picton. The kind of place that real estate listings describe as full of character, because the windows stick in July and the radiators knock in January. And the basement floods a little every spring. But honestly, I had grown fond of every eccentric thing about it. I had painted the front door a deep teal that my neighbor Carol said was bold, which I took as a compliment. I grew tomatoes in raised beds along the south fence. I kept a small wine fridge in the pantry stocked almost entirely with local Pinot Gris from wineries I could reach in under 20 minutes. On Friday evenings I drove into Picton for the farmer's market, bought cheese I didn't need, and walked along the main street feeling like a person who had figured something out. My daughter Zoe had her own life in Toronto. We talked on the phone most Sundays, and she visited a few times a year, which was a rhythm that worked for both of us. She was 31, smart, ambitious in the way people are when they've grown up watching their parents work too hard for too little. And she had been dating someone for about 8 months, whose name I had heard a handful of times but whom I had never met. His name was Seth. She spoke about him the way people speak about someone they're still performing for. Carefully, with a lot of emphasis on his credentials. He worked in real estate development, she'd said. He was very driven. He had great ideas about the market. I should have paid more attention to the word market. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late September, which was the first thing that didn't fit, because Zoe had told me on Sunday she might come by sometime next month. There was no sometime about it. I heard the car on the gravel and went to the window, and there was my daughter stepping out of a silver SUV I didn't recognize. And behind her, a man lifting 2 large overnight bags from the back, like he already knew where he was going to put them. I opened the door before they reached the porch. Zoe smiled the way she smiles when she has already rehearsed what she's going to say. Mom, surprise. We were driving through the county and I just thought, why not stop and actually introduce you two properly? She gestured at the man behind her. This is Seth. Seth Pryor extended his hand with a grip that was just slightly too firm, the kind of handshake that's been workshopped. He was maybe 40. Good-looking in the generic way of someone who exercised with intention and owned clothing in a narrow palette of gray and navy. Mrs. Calloway, he said, I've heard so much about you in this place. Zoe always says it's special, does she? I said. We thought we'd stay a night or two, Zoe said, already stepping inside. You always have room. That last part was true. The cottage had a guest room and I had always said Zoe was welcome anytime. But she and I both knew that any time came with an implicit understanding. You call first. You give me a day. You let me be a person who has a schedule rather than a set piece in whatever backdrop you've wandered into. I didn't say any of this. I showed them to the guest room, asked if they were hungry, and went back to the kitchen to start something for dinner. Seth offered to help, which I accepted, and in helping he managed to do what I would later understand was his most reliable talent. He made you feel good about showing him things. He asked about the wine fridge. He asked which wineries I preferred. He asked how long I'd had the property, how much land, whether I'd done the renovation myself. Every question arrived wearing the costume of genuine curiosity. But they all mapped, I realized only later, to the same territory. Over dinner he talked about the county real estate market with the fluency of someone who's had spent real time studying it. Vacancy rates, tourism traffic, short-term rental demand, the new cycling trail bringing a different kind of buyer into the area. Properties like this one, he said, gesturing vaguely at my dining room, my ceiling beams, my window that looks out over the back field, are genuinely rare. The acreage alone would be significant. I'm not selling, I said pleasantly. He laughed. No, of course not. I just mean, from a pure market perspective, you're sitting on something valuable. Zoe refilled her glass. Seth has a real eye for this stuff, Mom. He's done really well. I watched him absorb the compliment the way a plant absorbs water, without acknowledgement, as if it were simply his due. After dinner, while Seth took a phone call outside on the porch, Zoe helped me with the dishes, and I waited. I had known my daughter for 31 years. She had something to say. Mom, she started, drying a pot without looking at me. Seth and I have been talking. About you, a little, about me. You're out here alone, which is great, obviously, I know you love it. But it's a lot of property to manage at your age, and the winters here are rough, and we just think that maybe something more manageable, like a condo in Kingston or even Toronto, somewhere with services with people around. And this place? I asked. She set down the pot. Seth has contacts. He thinks he could find the right buyers, people who would appreciate it, and the money from the sale would be more than enough to set you up somewhere comfortable. Better than comfortable. There it was. The stone that dropped into my chest in that moment was cold and very specific. It wasn't just the suggestion. It was the word we think. We have been talking. They had rehearsed this. This was not a spontaneous visit. I dried my hands on the dish towel and smiled at my daughter. That's thoughtful of you both, I said. Let me think about it. Zoe looked relieved. She should not have been. The next morning I was up before 6, which is normal for me, and I had coffee ready when Seth came downstairs at 7 looking for breakfast with the easy expectation of a man who has never once entered a kitchen to find it empty and been surprised. I made eggs, I toasted sourdough, I put out the good Ontario cheddar, and I watched him settle into my kitchen like it was a whole dining room. You really are an incredible host, he said. I'm making breakfast in my own house, as I said, very kindly. He didn't notice the distinction. While they were out that afternoon, Zoe had suggested at a few wineries, which I encouraged with full sincerity. I opened my laptop. Seth Pryor, real estate developer, Ontario. The first thing I found was a company registration. Pryor propertied in 2019, listed address a postal box in Mississauga. Second thing I found was a second company, Lakeshore Capital Developments Limited. Registered 2021, same postal box, same director. I noted both. Then I searched the name alongside the word lawsuit. There was a CBC article from 14 months ago. Small, buried, a group of rural property owners in the Kawarthas had filed a civil claim against a development company that had offered to manage their properties as short-term rental investments. The arrangement. The company would handle everything. The owners would receive monthly payments from the rental income. The payments had come for 3 months, then stopped. When the owners tried to contact the company, the number had been disconnected. The company, Lakeshore Capital Developments Limited. I sat with that for a moment. Then I searched for anyone associated with the original complainants and found a name, Neil Sutherland, 73, retired teacher, Fenelon Falls. He had been quoted in a local paper saying he had lost his family's lakefront cottage through what he described as a contract he hadn't understood fully. Signed during a period when he was recently widowed and, as he put it, not as sharp as I should have been. I found a contact email for him through a community newsletter he was listed as contributing to. I wrote him a short, careful message. Then I kept looking. Seth had been in a business partnership before Pryor Property Solutions, a company called Meridian Lifestyle Investments that had been dissolved in 2018. The other named director was a woman. I found her through a LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in 3 years. Her name was Angela Forsyth, former small business owner. In the brief professional summary she'd written about herself, there was a single line that made me stop. Rebuilding after a business dissolution that cost me more than I expected. I wrote her a message too. By the time Zoe and Seth returned from stress, cheerful, slightly flushed, carrying a bottle they'd bought somewhere in Hillier, I had dinner ready and a clearer picture of exactly what had walked through my front door. That evening Seth talked about the cottage again. He had a developer contact who was looking for exactly this kind of property for a boutique in conversion. 12 to 15 rooms. The County Tourism Board had just released projections about increased leisure travel from the GTA. The timing is genuinely perfect, he said. This wouldn't sit on the market a week. I'd hate to see it become a hotel, I said mildly. Not a hotel, he said. A destination. That's completely different. Of course, I said. He smiled. My daughter watched me. I smiled back and poured more wine. After they went to bed, I did not go to bed. I sat at the kitchen table where the maple light had gone amber under the lamp, and I built what I needed to build. Angela Forsyth had replied. Her message was long. 2 careful paragraphs about the business she had co-owned with Seth, a property management company in Oakville, and how it had ended with the business assets sold suddenly, and the proceeds divided in a way that left her with significantly less than the partnership agreement had specified. She had considered legal action. She'd been advised it would be costly and slow. He was very good at making everything sound reasonable, she wrote. Right up until it wasn't. She said she'd sign a statement if I needed one. Neil Sutherland replied at 11:15. He was awake, he said, because he didn't sleep well anymore. He had been very direct. He described the contract Seth's company had presented as deceptively simple. He had signed over effective management authority, thinking it meant marketing and booking coordination. It had meant legally, something with far wider reach. By the time he understood what had happened, the company was unreachable, and his family's cottage, 50 years in the Sutherland family, had been tied up in a corporate structure he couldn't untangle without a lawyer he couldn't easily afford. I wish someone had found this before I signed, he said. I stayed up until 2. The folder I assembled included the CBC article, the company registrations showing the same postal box, the dissolution records for Meridian Lifestyle Investments, Angela's signed statement, Neil's documentation of the contract terms and his correspondence with the company's now disconnected number, and a complaint I filed with the Ontario Ministry of Government and Consumer Services Consumer Protection Branch. I printed copies, organized them in the blue folder I use for tax documents, and placed the folder on the kitchen table before I went to bed. On top of it I put a sticky note in my handwriting, Seth, morning reading with your coffee. My alarm went off at 5:45. I got up, made coffee, set the table for 3. His coffee, black, the way he'd had it both mornings, in my second best mug, the one with the county winery logo that I usually save for guests. The folder sat where I'd left it, blue and plain and entirely unremarkable looking until you opened the first page. I heard him on the stairs at 6:30. He came into the kitchen already looking at his phone. That quality of mild distraction that confident people perform when they want you to know they have things going on. He saw the table, the coffee, said, "You really do this every morning?" with the warmth of someone giving a compliment that is also slightly condescending. "I do," I said. He sat down, lifted the mug. Then his eyes moved to the folder. "What's this?" "Just some reading I put together," I said. "Since we've been talking about my property and my future." He set the mug down. He opened the folder. I poured myself coffee and stood at the counter, watching out the window at the back field, which in early October has gone the gold brown of dried grasses, and is genuinely beautiful at 6:30 in the morning. I gave him time to read. The important thing, I had decided, was not to perform anything, not satisfaction, not anger, just to let the pages do what pages do when they contain the truth. After a few minutes I heard him stop turning them. "Where did you get this?" he said. "Public record," I said. "And from 2 people who remembered you quite clearly. Angela is." He started. "Angela signed a statement," I said. "Neil Sutherland did as well. He's one of the complainants in the CBC piece, the one about the Kawarthas. In case you didn't recognize his name." Silence. "Carolyn," he said, dropping the Mrs. Calloway, which was information. "This is all. I also filed a complaint yesterday evening," I said, "with the Consumer Protection Branch. I included both statements, the company registration records, and a detailed account of the conversation you had with my daughter and me about my property." He looked at me then. The warmth was completely gone, and what was underneath it was not what I expected. It wasn't anger. It was the expression of someone very quickly recalculating a spreadsheet. Zoe appeared in the doorway in her robe, taking in the scene the way you take in an accident, your brain processing faster than your expression can keep up. "What's happening?" she said. "Seth found the reading I left with his coffee," I said. I looked at my daughter. 31 years of knowing this person. She was not a bad person. She was a trusting person who had met someone very skilled at presenting himself as the most competent one in any room. "Zoe," I said, "come sit down. There are some things about Seth's business history that you should probably know." Seth tried. "I'll say that. He called the CBC article misleading. He described Angela as someone who hadn't understood the business structure. He called Neil Sutherland's situation complicated by his own choices. Each time he spoke, his voice was a little more careful, and his explanations were a little more elaborate. And I watched my daughter's face moving through something I recognized. Not just surprise, but the specific recalibration of someone who has been choosing not to look at something too directly. She said, almost to herself, "You always wanted to come here. You brought it up on our second date. I mentioned the cottage and you said, Prince Edward County, that's serious real estate." The kitchen went quiet. "There's been a miscommunication," Seth said. "About what?" Zoe said. And her voice had changed. She was not asking for reassurance. She was asking for an answer. Seth stood up. He had made his calculation. He went upstairs. We could hear him. Closet drawers, the zip of a bag. Zoe sat at my kitchen table and didn't move. I poured her a coffee and sat across from her. He was down in 12 minutes. He had his overnight bag and his jacket. He did not say goodbye to me. To Zoe he said, "We'll talk," in the tone of someone who intends to reframe everything once there's more distance and fewer folders. "We won't," she said. He left. The silver SUV reversed out of my gravel drive and was gone. Zoe sat for a long time without speaking. "He had the same conversation with you that he had with my mother," she said finally. "About the cottage being manageable. About your age." He used almost the same words. "Yes," I said. "I think he has a script." "How did you know so fast?" I thought about Seth's eyes moving across my dining room that first evening, tallying up the ceiling height and the window light and the acreage in the way you look at something that isn't yours yet but that you are already certain will be. He looked at this house the way someone looks at a business opportunity, I said. Not the way a guest looks at someone's home. "I should have seen that," she said. "You were looking at him the way you look at someone you care about," I said. "That's not the same set of eyes." The ministry called 4 days later. The complaint I had submitted, along with Angela's statement and Neil's documentation, had been added to an existing file on Seth Pryor and his associated companies. There had been other complaints, similar patterns, rural properties in Ontario, property owners who were older, recently widowed, recently divorced, living alone. The Consumer Protection Branch was coordinating with the RCMP's fraud unit. My filing had, I was told, provided a connecting thread between 3 separate incidents they had been tracking in parallel. A real estate lawyer I contacted confirmed what I had feared for myself. The management agreement Seth had emailed Zoe a draft of, she had forwarded it to me without registering what it was, would have given a company of his designation effective authority to list, lease, and enter into agreements regarding my property for a term of 5 years, with automatic renewal, with fees drawn from revenue before any amount reached me. I would have been next. I didn't know then about Neil Sutherland's hearing date, but I knew he had one because he messaged me after the ministry called him. "They're reopening my file," he wrote. "I think it's going to be all right. Thank you for believing me." I read that message sitting on my back porch, in the last of the October light, with my tea cooling in my hands and the backfield doing that thing it does in the evening when the grasses catch the low sun and the whole 2 acres goes briefly golden. Zoe stayed for the week. Not as a visitor who expected things from me. As my daughter, who needed somewhere quiet while she worked out what her life looked like now. She helped me put the garden to bed for winter. She drove into Picton with me on Friday for the market. She did not once mention what I should do with the property or my retirement. On her last morning she sat on the porch with me, before she drove back to Toronto, and we watched a flight of Canada geese move across the gray sky in a slow, deliberate V. "I want to ask you something," she said. "All right. Did you know, right away?" I thought about Thursday afternoon, the silver SUV in my gravel, Seth lifting their bags with the confidence of a man who has already figured out where he's putting them. "I knew something was off," I said. "I needed a day to know what it was, and then you just made him breakfast." "I made him exactly what he walked in expecting," I said, "and I let the morning take care of the rest." She was quiet for a moment. A second V of geese followed the first, slightly lower. "Mom," she said, "I'm sorry I let someone use me to get to you." "You didn't let him," I said. "He was practiced. That's different." I looked at her. "I'm not interested in you carrying that. I'm going to be more careful," she said. "Good," I said. "So am I." She left around noon. I stood in the driveway and watched until I couldn't see the car anymore. Then I went inside, made a fresh cup of tea, and went back out to the porch. The fraud investigation was ongoing. Angela Forsyth had submitted her statement to the RCMP file. Neil Sutherland had a hearing date. And I had my back field, and my teal front door, and my slightly wobbling kitchen table, and my Friday market, and 2 acres of October in Prince Edward County, that I had paid for myself and intended to grow old in slowly and deliberately and entirely on my own terms. Some people will tell you that once you reach a certain age and you're living alone, the world starts treating your independence like a condition to be managed rather than a choice to be respected. That people begin making decisions on your behalf while calling it concerns. That someone will always appear with a warm handshake and a very reasonable proposal, and eyes that are doing math you're not supposed to notice. What I want to say to those people, and to every woman watching this who has spent years building something that is entirely hers, is this: they are counting on you to be polite. They are counting on you to want to keep the peace more than you want to keep what you've built. They are counting on the fact that you will smile and nod, and say you'll think about it, and they will take that as progress. Let them think that, and then go open your laptop. Stay with me here at Lyra Payback. If you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who is holding on to something they built, someone who is being told their life needs to be simplified for their own good, please share this with them. I'll see you in the next one.